Hey everyone, it's Eugene. I'm the Dungeon Master for the Long Strange Cantrips March of Progress 5e campaign. You can catch us streaming that live on Twitch at twitch.tv/longstrangecantrip, link below, every other week, typically Fridays at 7 p.m. Pacific time. In that campaign, we are bringing a not traditional fantasy setting with some very fun characters and what I hope is a compelling story. And on this YouTube channel, we will be doing the recaps, full episodes, highlights, some other content, but also DM notes, like this very DM note that you're watching here. My intent is to cover my impressions as a Dungeon Master of how the previous session went, what I planned and didn't plan, what I thought went well, and where I think we can take lessons from for the future. The first caveat I'll give here is that this video is not for players of this campaign. If you're a player, don't watch this. It'll ruin the fun. D&D is a game about suspension of disbelief, and that's what creates stakes and drama and makes it an exciting experience for players and by proxy viewers of the campaign. It's as if someone were to go through your day and comment on everything that was happening and what they had planned for it and what they thought went well and poorly. It sort of takes the fun out of things to hear someone say, you know, Judy did this part well, this part was a surprise to me, this I didn't really plan for. I mean, if you're Judy, you're kind of thinking, well, what's the point of even going on? So if you're a player or if you're Judy, don't watch unless you are Judy and not a player in the campaign, then you're probably fine. Back to what I was saying. DM notes. We just had our very first session. You can watch the full episode at the link above, and you can catch the highlights at the link below. I suppose that there will be a link below to the full highlight as well, but that's neither here nor there. And here's how I thought it went. The state of the campaign is strong. Things are going pretty well, and I think that's largely based on the fact that the first session itself went well. First sessions are always fun to watch, and I encourage everybody to do that because you are seeing the players get comfortable with their own characters, with one another's characters, with the DM style, and the DM also getting comfortable with everything I just mentioned as well. I've already had some comments on my particular DM style. If you have any such comments, please leave them below. I'd love to hear that. I have been doing this for a while. I really enjoy DMing, but I am not particularly experienced. You know, I'm not in like the top 10th percentile of experienced DMs, I would say. I think my enjoyment makes up for that, but I can always learn more. And in fact, that's what these notes are partly about. So let's start off with what I think went well and what I think we can take away as a positive note. So you may have noticed in watching it that the episode began with a monologue and introduction from a otherworldly kind of entity who is set in this celestial library, as I dubbed it. This was unconventional, I think, for me to have, you know, someone other than the Dungeon Master with an omniscient sense of what's going on in the campaign. And the inspiration here was, well, and the intent was twofold. First, I had in mind something like Grant Morrison's run on the Animal Man comics, this sort of fourth wall breaking narrative that I've always enjoyed. I think that it can create a sort of authority on what's happening without creating a sense of the correct version of events. In other words, it's an imperfect narrator, an omniscient entity who still has a point of view. And the other seed that it can plant is maybe in the future, if the players, the player characters, or really anybody else has a need to shape events, they will turn to and perhaps encounter these entities that sort of sit outside of space and time and have omniscient, perfect, seemingly perfect knowledge of events that are going on to help influence what happens in the world. And I think that would be really cool to sort of have the players try to reconcile those things, because they are, of course, in the room when I'm speaking as this omniscient party, and they will develop a relationship with them and probably not expect to actually encounter them. Going back to the Grant Morrison point, one thing that he did in Animal Man, which I think would be really cool, is had the character meet him, Grant Morrison, in the comic. So if the players can meet a Eugene, the DM, as their players in the context of the game, that would be really awesome. But I want that to come from them. I don't want to drive that, because I think it has the potential of being super contrived. The second inspiration for that is if any of you have played Divinity Original Sin, there's this Weaver who is sort of creating the universe, and she has an imp assistant, and she's got this big loom, this tapestry that has everybody's stories on it, and the heroes of the game, you as the player, really do encounter her, and you go to that realm, the place outside of time, to try to shape events, because in fact that very place is being threatened by the Void Dragon. I just thought that concept was really cool. Clearly I took the concept of the loom straight from that, and that's what I've heard a good dungeon master does. Borrows liberally from things that inspire them, because it's like girl talk. When you mash it all up, it can become something new and exciting and original, and I hope that that's where I end up. That's the intention anyway. Another thing that I thought went well was the overall introduction of the characters, and the idea of breaking them up into separate scenes, which established some relationships between pairs. It didn't have to be pairs. It doesn't have to be split up evenly. That's just how I chose to do it this time. And the idea of having them interact with one another before being thrust into the larger group. I think that one day I will get over this impulse, but I really have a distaste for the classic, you are 6 dudes who want to make a bunch of money and crack skulls. You start in a tavern. Something about me reacts negatively to that start. In fact, this is a defect in me. I want to be able to have that start comfortably, because I think excellent things can spring from that. But I at this point, at least in my dungeon mastering career, I want to do something that's a little different. And in this case, you may have noticed there are going to be themes of work and labor in this campaign. And all 3 of these groups, all 6 of the characters, are workers for, in fact, bureaucratic entities. They're not sort of independent entrepreneurs who are delving into dungeons. They have a place within an existing society. They're not from outside of it. And I hope that that will play into it and become an interesting theme and spark some fun interactions between the players and their world. Another thing that I thought went well was the first encounter. In this case, the obstacle was that there were threats on the event that they were attending, the launch of the RNS Cold Tongue, and they were supposed to be using their skills to overcome that. And overcome that they did. And I thought that the way that the players picked their skills was quite elegantly representative of their characters. That ability to role play the characters, to pick solutions that reflect who they're playing and aren't necessarily the most efficient solutions to the problems that they're facing, to me, that was a great moment, a great showcase of the characters' personalities, abilities, flaws, defects, and encapsulated well the idea of role-playing. You may recall specifically the character Dipnip, player Nyx, use of his ability, his keen mind, to apply that to a very inefficient solution, which in the context of the character makes sense. Talk to every single one of these 1,000 people. He says, I'm a smart guy. That's the best way to get proof positive of who is the person who will disrupt this event. So I'm going to do that. Obviously a bad solution. Nick, a smart person, knows that that's a bad solution, but Dip-Nip doesn't. And that's the sort of thing. And likewise, Brachus is very aggressive, not necessarily the smartest. Casey, the player, knows that it is not good to go up and yell at random people in the hopes that you, as a police officer, effectively will intimidate them. Brachus maybe doesn't know that, and so he pushes that button, the intimidation button, and not just because he's good at it, but rather because it is what makes sense for the character. Here's what I thought went not as well. The scene after that first skill challenge, where the characters are milling about and hear little snippets of conversation from the various dignitaries who are in attendance for the launch of the RNS Koltong, I thought was too much. My intent was to create an atmosphere of sort of awe at the kind of magnificence of all of the people in attendance, and also to impress upon the players and the characters that this is a world where ideas and philosophy matters, and maybe to introduce some of the core concepts therefrom. But I thought that it was just too much, that it was a very cursory survey of those concepts without really diving into any of them. It involved zero interaction from the players, so I think next time there's probably a way to do that more successfully if we want to engage with those things. The other thing that I think could have gone better was to create more space in general for the players to interact with one another and to develop their characters and relationships. This is something that I think in the first few sessions, there's always going to be some miscalculation, whether it's to give too much space or too little, because the players and characters don't know each other that well, and they might not be comfortable engaging in open conversation and dialogue, and they also don't necessarily understand what's expected of them as players. For example, are they supposed to be creating their own scenes and adventures right now? Are they supposed to say, hey, let's go out to the pub and grab a drink? Or, hey, I'm a little concerned that this event might be put off the rails by this particular group that I've heard about somewhere in the lore of this world. Maybe we should investigate that. They don't know if I'll be okay with that as a DM. They don't want to upset anything, so the players will be more timid. On the other hand, if I keep moving from scene to scene, action to action that I have in my head, then it really gives them very little chance to sort of luxuriate in the events that are going on, and also doesn't create the kind of space for them to have actually authentic, realistic conversations. If you think about it, these people are meeting each other for the first time. They, as players, are not. They, as players, can very easily metabolize the concept that we're being put together in a group. This group will have many adventures together, so we just have to get over this initial stage. And they can sort of move on from that. But the characters, they've never seen these other people in their lives. They don't know that they're going to have a lifetime of epic adventures together. In fact, they would probably be interested in, like, who are you? What are you doing here? Why are you helping me? Do I like you? Do I hate you? Do you have the same motivations as me? You think when you meet someone, you tend to have certain conversations with them to bridge those gaps, and even just to fill awkward silences that don't exist when you have all this assumed baggage that comes in with being a D&D adventuring party. I didn't do that as well as I should have. That's something that I will try to improve in the forthcoming sessions. But I'm curious if anybody out there has any tips for how to accomplish this. How do you get the players to have natural interactions in the first few moments of knowing one another? Please leave any such tips in the comments below. Now, one other thing that I want to mention is what was planned, what was not planned. Everybody has a different DMing style. I found that what I enjoy doing is writing out long descriptions of the world, ones that are supposed to be evocative and to really give the players a sense of weight and place as they're sinking into the idea of becoming these characters and inhabiting this realm. One thing that I found inspiring that's almost the inverse of that is I don't really like to plan how certain things will occur, or even that certain things will occur. Obviously, in order to have a fun session, both for myself and for the players, you need to reach certain milestones. So for example, one milestone that we needed to reach is all of these players being in the same place and being forced to interact with one another. But as soon as I started thinking about the idea of, okay, I know where these will start, I know where those will start, we've got these 3 discrete groups, how do we get them to meet each other? I identified that as the kind of thing that, we can just let that develop. We have some reason for them to be in the same geographic space, but I don't want to create some kind of Deus Ex Machina moment where they're thrown into the same crucible where their friendships are finally forged. Instead, I wanted to leave it open to have this emergent moment where they would meet each other in a fun and serendipitous way. Effectively, they would have like a meet cute. And I think that actually turned out really well and quite memorably, for me at least, as the DM. It was one of those moments where it might come off as absolutely planned, but it absolutely wasn't. And that was the moment where, in searching for the culprits at this event, all of the 4 PCs who were there and charged with this task, Ekthos, Dipnip, Brachus, and Ren, were using their various powers and trying to apprehend these would-be perpetrators. And finally, as they're in the process of finishing this task, Ekthos unleashes this mechanical weasel that he had been talking about earlier in the episode. And it does its job, which is to identify the culprit, but in the process trips people. And that was the moment where I said, okay, I know that Egberticus and Ume are going to be at this event as well. I haven't found a way for them to meet yet. Aha. The cake, which Ume and Egberticus had talked about earlier and were so proud of, ends up upturned on the ground and brings them together in a somewhat confrontational but also sort of inexorable way, because Egberticus and Ume are going to want to get some kind of justice for their cake, and then they're going to be swept into this other event. I think that moment was one of those things that, like I said earlier, seems totally planned, but in fact was not, and that's what makes it very gratifying to DM. I really hope that moment was fun and lively for the players, and that's precisely why they shouldn't watch this video. They shouldn't have they shouldn't be influenced by what was planned and what wasn't, and instead should be free to find and create those meaningful moments and have their disbelief suspended. So those are my notes for session 1 of the March of Progress. As I said, I intend to do these for each session. I didn't realize it would go so long, but as I was talking through this, it turned out to be a sort of quasi-therapy session about my experience and the experience of being a DM in general. I'd love to hear your comments on what we talked about today, and also on the DM style during the session, what I can improve, and what you thought worked particularly well. So please make sure to leave those below. Please head on over to our Twitch channel, twitch.tv/longstrangecantrip, to follow and get updates about every one of our live streams. And finally, if you thought that this was helpful or enlightening or just fun to watch, please do subscribe, like, all that jazz. Until next time, this is Eugene. May your rolls be 20s and your misses be few.